to Found in Translation, a weekly-ish exploration of one fellow's translation of the Christian scriptures, one chapter-ish at a time. I'm Brandon Rhodes, and across the internet from me is the translator himself, Brandon Johnson. Hey, Brandon.
Hey, Brandon.
Good to see you in this new format.
Yeah. Get to see you, and other people get to see us.
Mm-hmm. Our condolences.
That's right.
How are you doing?
Have to.
Uh-huh. How you doing this day?
Oh, pretty good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's appreciating the sunlight. We normally do this when it's dark outside.
We usually do.
So we have been.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so it's not only that we're recording at a different time of day, we're also having different kinds of beverages. Usually we both have cocktails, usually Manhattans. What are you having this? I assume this time of day you are not having a Manhattan. What are you having today?
Before noon isn't the best time for that? I don't know.
Yeah. Frowned upon.
No, I've got chamomile lavender tea today.
Excellent. Well, and I'm having a rooibos with kava and lavender. So
hey,
we're both having sedatives for this. So hopefully we stay awake enough for everybody watching and listening. Which brings me to, we are doing the video version of this thing now,
right?
Which is exciting. So welcome everybody to season 2 of Found in Translation. The first season was only available as an audio podcast, and we were exploring Brandon's at-home translation of the Gospel according to Matthew. Now, our plan for season 2 has always been, it's got to be Ephesians. If we're going to go into Paul, we got to go into Ephesians. It's so fun. But that's not the only change we wanted to make. After hearing from our listeners, we understood that these conversations could be even better in a format where you can actually see it on the screen persistently. Being able to glance at the text that we're talking about is kind of an important part of how this whole conversation works. So this is our first episode of broadcasting this on Facebook Live, and we'll be putting it on YouTube as well. So we're gonna, right now you're just looking at the two Brandons here, but we are gonna, here in a few minutes, move it front and center for you. So the bulk of the screen is going to be the text, which, fingers crossed, the recording quality will be good enough for you to be able to read it sufficiently. So yeah, that's what's changed. So we're talking this week about just the first part of the first chapter of Ephesians. If you haven't had a chance to read Brandon's translation ahead of time, well, for those of you joining on YouTube or Facebook Live, we will have the translation up on the screen here momentarily. And for those of you listening, we highly encourage you to read through it. There's a link to the translation in the show notes. And as always, be sure to check out the footnotes on this one. As you'll see, if you've already opened it up, it starts with a lot of big footnotes. So yeah, take a minute if you're listening to give it a read. Hit pause and give it a read. So I want to say a couple things about Ephesians here at the beginning, as well as some of the pacing that we're going to do a little differently this season. One of the lessons we learned in going through a book as big as Matthew is that a lot of the big turns in terms that the translation project produced came up early, and we tended to hit it as soon as we could. So as soon as righteousness was replaced with something else, as soon as sin was replaced with deviations, we spent a lot of time going over that. And then later on would just sort of variously brush past it or over explain it again. So we're going to be trying to take certain words and paste them out further out in Ephesians, especially if they're a little bit less urgent for us to talk about. So that first footnote there with the word emissary, where there's usually apostle, that's a really fun thing to get to talk about. We're going to find another time to do that. So if your favorite word or term or change doesn't make it into this episode, keep listening and watching, and we will talk about it a little later. Second thing is you look at any remotely scholastic book about Ephesians, and there's a lot of scholastic headaches and arguments over who wrote it. There's plenty of good reasons, looking carefully at the text, to suppose that it wasn't actually the Apostle Paul who wrote it. And there are some decent arguments to say why, if it was either Paul or someone very, very close to him trying to be faithful to the spirit of his teaching over a couple decades. So for us, apart from who we think wrote it, I'll speak for myself. I'm not too interested or worried about it, but we're going to just call it Paul. So if that bothers you, cool. We'll just say Paul, and we'll mean we'll really just mean the author, and let the listeners and viewers understand that. Fill it in as you see fit if you have a strong opinion about something that nerdy. Anything else you want to add to introducing Ephesians, Brandon?
It was fun. It was definitely very different than translating Matthew. I think you and I have talked about this. Making a lot of jokes about like Paul's great learning has driven him mad. It's like, what in the world? These sentences, like, they stretch on for like 6 verses, but like kind of go on one idea, go off on a tangent for a while, come back to that same idea like mid thought, like 4 verses later. It's like, what in the world?
Right.
So a lot more dense. Like, I had to pull out my grammar text much more frequently to look up all the different uses of prepositions, because like every preposition seems to be really important, whereas that not so much in a narrative like Matthew. And there's a lot less context of what's happening in a document like this to help kind of fill that in. So it was a very different experience translating this than it was Matthew.
Awesome. Yeah, the word choice and terms are all quite a bit different. And some of the consistent words and ideas and themes really had a couple of 2 to 4 decades to mature and ripen and develop, frankly, just in different communities than from Matthew to Ephesians. So some of the words and ideas that we're going to explore are going to be ones we have talked about in Matthew, but we're going to do our best to explore it through what did it mean to Paul in Ephesus, with at least a generation there of maturing and deepening and community reflection and practice around these words and ideas and stories. So, okay, the first one that I want to talk to you about is at the end of that very first line.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, can you just read that first line? We're exploring the word desire here.
Chapter 1, verse 1. From Paul, an emissary from Christ Jesus, by God's desire.
So usually it's the word will there. It's God's will. Why was that worth changing?
all the reasons.
Okay, alphabetically then.
Yes, yes. Honestly, I think that comes from just like outdated English. But it has like, we've held onto it when it's about God, but not when it's about other people in our translating, because God's will has become this like really theologically significant concept,
Sure.
even though the language there is no different than just like desire or want. It's not any more weighty than I'm hungry, so I want some lunch. Like, that's it. That's what the word means. And it can be a really intense, like, I want to get married. Like, that's a much bigger want, right? Versus I want a snack. But just like the English word want can have that whole range, so can this Greek word thelo. And it's not supposed to be, yeah, and you see that show up. Like, it's not this term of like this theological term of God's will. It's just not.
Yeah.
Some really good examples that I thought of is like in John 1:43, it has the same verb here, thelo, that just says Jesus wanted to set out for Galilee.
Yeah.
Like, I guess you could say it was Jesus's will that he set out for Galilee. And it sounds much more weighty, but it just means he wanted to go.
Like, it's kind of severe.
Yeah. And another one is in Matthew chapter 20, where the two blind men call out to Jesus for help, calling him son of David. And he says, what do you want me to do for you? Like, it's just this very straightforward question. That's this word here. He's not asking them, two blind men, what is your will for me? Like, it's not.
Right.
It's just very weird when you start getting the word will in this like religious setting.
Yeah. And the tradition around God's will has been such a gross and harmful and abusive and anxiety inducing space. Am I in God's will? There's one meticulous path of God's intention that we must precisely navigate our way through, like the Ninja Challenge show. Like, we just got to hit every little bit to get across.
Right.
And otherwise, if we deviate from that, we're, in a bad way. And that God, a will is also just something that it's like a decree. It's a fiat. It's this kind of monarchical deigning.
There's an authority behind it.
Which, I mean, God is authoritative. We will get to that in a couple of verses here. But
that's not what this word is.
That's not what this word is. Like, there's also affections and longing and hope that are all blended into deciding to go do something.
Yeah. And I think in verse 11, like, here is just kind of like God wanted this, wanted me to be an emissary here. And, but I think it carries a little bit more weight in verse 11 if we want to peek at that real quick.
Sure. Let's see, verse 11. There we go.
So we were also assigned with him, with Christ, marked out in advance to be presented by the one who enacts everything based on the intentions he has in mind. So intentions there being how I translated it in this context. So what he wanted to have happen, what he was moving, what the direction he was moving into based on what his desires were, basically. But intentions and like, I want to move in this direction, to me feels very different than based on his will. Like, this is going to happen because I said so.
Right. Yeah. It leaves space for other visions and understandings of how God's desires for the world, or God's will, whatever you want to call it, interface, like how it actually works. Like, let's pop it open a little bit, make it a bit softer here, in a good way, but it's more spacious.
Yeah. And it still has to do with what God is wanting to have happen and like taking action to get it there. But I think it just creates a buffer between some of what you were talking about earlier of like those abuses, those like toxic sense of that anxiety producing, is this God's will or is it not? Is it or not? Is it or not? Oh God, I hope it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a real relief to be able to just find it in the text instead of having to do what we're doing of like having an extended aside, like so often in sermons or in like a Bible study group or whatever. It feels like you have to clarify how to round the sharp edges of conventional and dominant translations, which generally have come from traditions of imperial power and strength, and so they have unchecked dispositions towards a monarchical vision of the divine, who is more like
an
the pharaoh
yeah.
of at the top of a pyramid than the one who is crucified.
Yeah, a lot of our visions of God as have inherited them have been much more like Pharaoh, like Caesar, than they have been like Jesus.
Yeah. So let's go back to that. Great. So the next one that I think is worth exploring today is highest heavens in verse 3. As the translator, would you lend your voice?
Sure. So starting at the beginning of the verse, may our God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ be praised, having pronounced good things for you regarding every benefit associated with the life breath in the highest heavens.
Now, I had not thought of this as a phrase that was all that liberative or healing, but then as we got talking about it earlier this week in preparation for this episode, it popped me open to a deeper listening for it. So,
yeah, looking at it in the Greek and just like as carefully as I have to do to translate is like really starting to like highlight in Matthew, for instance, we only had 2 levels to deal with, really. It was like heavens or sky, as we have gone back and forth about the better way to, definitely not heaven with the capital H.
No.
But the heavens or the sky and the land or the earth. And that was simpler, kind of has the sense of like top to bottom, everything inclusive, or where God is, or in God's presence, or with God in view, versus a more human experience, leaning experience. But Paul starts to like really differentiate between like multiple different levels within each of those 2 categories. So the word here isn't the same as heaven, uranos. It's epi-uranos, which literally means like whatever is on or over the uranos, the heavens. So it's like the very top part.
Beyond what we can see, beyond the firmament.
Sure. I mean, yeah, if you're trying to find like
beyond
a physical
where Bezos
location for it. Yeah, like yes. So there's that, and then there's just like the regular uranos, the regular heavens, and then at one point it talks about the air is how it's usually translated, but it's really the same, like the part of the atmosphere, but the part that's closest to the land, the part that we're breathing in, the part that we're in right now, and the significance of all these levels is not because it's talking about some weird cosmic dimension.
No.
It's talking about levels of power and authority. The higher altitude you get in the image that you're using, you're attributing it the most power, the most authority. And so like even when you get to the part where it's talking about the air, it's like saying, yeah, there's some power and authority there, because otherwise I would say that on the land, but it's the lowest tier of that.
Sure. So you're erring, so to speak, towards
yes.
you're a more literal translation here, which is also a more phenomenological way of describing power relations or cosmic, mysterious mojo.
Yeah. It's weird. It's both more literal and metaphorical at the same time still. Like it's just making sure it's leaning on what I think is the metaphor that it's actually trying to lean on, rather than the like Dante-esque much later European like things that have just like gotten put into it.
Like a layer cake of like better people. So even in the afterlife, there's still a like hierarchy of like some people are still better than other people.
Right. And like so a lot of translations do the heavenlies instead of highest heavens, or even I've seen some of them do like heavenly places. And that's still, I mean, it's if you're understanding that to mean like a symbol of authority and power, fine, I guess, but there's no places in the Greek. It's everyone is trying to figure out, what do we do with this? What meaning is this actually trying to get at, and trying to figure out how to bring that out.
It's a bind, which direction you want to go at this point, because for myself, I love translations that make it more arcane, not more like weird religious language that we're like over familiar with, but enunciate the foreignness of it. There's a translation of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. It's called The 5 Books of Moses by Everett Fox. And it reads so strangely because it's leaning so valiantly into the weirdness and the idioms that were so normal. And he has footnotes to explain it. But and it seems that you're erring on that side of being comfortable with the alienness of the idioms they use to texture reality. The other direction here would be to say, find another way of saying, having pronounced good things for you regarding every benefit associated with the life breath in the deepest part of reality, like making some sort of appeal to ultimate power, to, again, like power language is so much of what the Christ deconstructs and tears apart and rebuilds around God's self.
Yeah.
And the crucifixion, that it's hard to know how to enunciate that sense of the truest core of reality, the grain of reality, of a spirit infused reality, is what we're getting at here. Whether you talk about a 3-decker reality, or you're talking about the more phenomenological language of Paul's day, or just saying like, the, I guess, more poetic notions that I'm getting at. Like
I am trying to let the poetic language, the imagery, the metaphors do their own work to an extent. I could have just said something along the lines of with the most authority. Yeah. And that would work, but it would also narrow it. In general, I think the part of the beauty of metaphors is that it allows some ambiguity, some sense of this can communicate more than one thing, and it can land in different ways in different contexts for different people. And just removing the imagery and just trying to like, here's what this means. it does away with a lot of that, and it makes it less good literature.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. So the next idea to explore together is, if I can get it the right size on the screen. In verse 4, we're going to talk about where there's usually the word saints, but here you have sacred. Can you lend your voice to this?
Just as God designated us to be with him before the founding of the world, he designated us to be sacred and without blemish, as far as he's concerned, through love, having marked us out in advance for adoption as heirs through Jesus Christ, based on what seemed good for his intention. We'll stop us there.
Sure.
Yeah, sacred.
Mm-hmm.
The Greek there is hagios, that word that traditionally, depending on how it's being used, is either holy when it's being used as an adjective, as a describing word, or like you said, as saints when it's being used as like a designation for who these people are. So like maybe more literal, going with the holy is like holy ones, because it's still an adjective technically, but it just doesn't designate holy what in the Greek. Holy people. And holy, if there's ever been a religious technical term, holy is that. So it's not a bad word, but it has, like everything else that we've been talking about, way too much baggage and way too much stuff that goes with it that makes it, that distracts from what I think it's actually trying to get at. And sacred, so sacred, I think, actually does really, really well in most contexts. You and I have talked about this a little bit. When it's talking about people, I'm actually not fully settled on that. Like, what is the actually best way to do here? And part of that is honestly similar to some of the effects of the word holy, of kind of there being this judgmental, like good and bad dichotomy. Is that if there are people who are sacred, that's implying that there are people who are not sacred. And I don't like that.
Why don't you like that?
Because it depends, I guess, on what you're meaning by sacred. And the way that we talk about life being sacred, people being sacred, is that there's something precious about it, and that it has value, and that it should be treated with care and dignity. And I would say that that's true of every single human person. And it isn't any more true for one group than another.
Yes, sir.
So the implication of using the word sacred with people feels like it's hinting at, maybe I think there's a tiered value system with people, and that's not true.
Right.
So I'm trying to figure out, what do we do with this instead? And I am not sure.
Yeah, what is the heart of what it's trying to get at here? The word. What's the word itself mean?
It has to do with kind of being designated for a purpose.
Hagios or hagioi, is it?
Yeah, hagios. Plural being hagioi. And so, like, you can talk about having cups and glasses in your cupboard, and they're all just cups and glasses. And I pull out a wine glass that's designated specifically for the purpose of holding wine. Right. So that's in that way, it's a holy glass because it's designated for a specific purpose. And it's not about it being more valuable. It's about it having a particular purpose. Um, so that's really at the core of what hagios means.
Okay.
And it's usually used in kind of a religious context, but so designated for a specific religious or spiritual purpose, but not about value in any way, or even about being moral or immoral or any of the other things that we often associate with holiness.
No. Yeah. It so easily means better, more virtuous. It's very much about some intersection of how someone's character intersects with someone's reputation, someone's interior intersecting with their exterior, and being particularly virtuous. And then saints, that's another.
Oh yeah, that gets into all sorts of stuff.
It sure does. I mean, like there's a whole designation in the Roman tradition of folks being designated as a saint, which I love the tradition of being able to say, this is an exemplar that we are going to uphold and remember, and make it a point to
a model
tell the
that
stories
we can
of.
learn from. And
yeah, I love it. And when the word saint shows up in here to mean Christians, it's like, well, that's messed up. That's that's not really what the word saints means. He could have said it, but he didn't. He chose a word that is resonant with, brimming with, like, these instances of, well, the temple and the Levites and people being dedicated.
Right. Yeah. That without blemish right next to it is clearly about temple sacrifice kind of language. Yeah. So that point about being like the Levites.
Yeah. So for a bit of context, the Levites were the tribe that was designated to do the cultic matters, first in the tabernacle and then later in the temple. And while all of Israel was to be a royal, is the language royal priesthood or kingdom of priests? The one that's, one of them's in like Peter or something, and the other one is in the Hebrew.
I think they essentially mean the same thing, but
the heart of it being what the Levites are to you,
to Israel,
you Israel, you as a dedicated people. You are holy in your own way. They are holy in their own way within you. It's almost like this, like Matryoshka doll kind of thing here.
And then within the Levites, you have the descendants of Aaron, who are the priests serving the Levite, and then the high priest,
it's these concentric rings of these are the people who don't just facilitate the religious things, but they become icons of inspiration for what it means for us to be, as they mediate the divine and hold the stories with us. And they, this is getting into more broad ways of describing the priestly function, translating creation to God and God to creation. That's a little bit grossly binary for us as part of an incarnational religion, or them as a creational religion. But
another way that's coming to mind is as in leadership at the agency where I've worked for the last several years, the language that I have started using as I train new supervisors and stuff is that we're not thinking of the positions as a chain of command from the executive director to the director's team to the supervisors to the we're thinking of it as a chain of support.
That's good.
The people on the front lines need the support of the supervisors, to have what they need to do their job well and to have that be sustainable and accomplishing the goals. And the supervisor needs the directors to do that for them. The executive, it's this chain of support. And I think that's exactly what's happening here. Is the priests are supporting that connection between the divine and the human, and the Levites are carrying that out more broadly to the rest of the people. And like there's this chain, and then the Levites doing that with Israel doing that with everyone else, supporting everyone and finding that connection between the human and the divine.
Yes. Yeah. And
it's the purpose that they've been called to, that they're designated to fill that role.
So Paul here is folding them into Israel's story here, to use Willie Jennings' language. They're being folded into Israel's story, and the images and practices that held and sustain that identity can become not just things that are replicated, but freshly re-explored together. And in this case, take any given part of the temple. Like, it's not explicitly saying you guys are like, you're the sacrifice, or you could be the lamb right now in this moment. Because then he just like jumps right down to and even marked out in advance for adoption as heirs. Like, he is throwing every metaphor he can. So even if it's not Paul writing this, the person has certainly captured Paul's willingness to just very non-anxiously, technically drawing from so many themes in his tradition and his people to describe his understanding of what Creator has done through Jesus. So I love that this sidesteps the kind of us versus them binary, like a worthiness binary, and it's more teleological. It's more,
that's the goal.
Yeah. Like, you're not, again, this is something we say over and over in the first season, but you're not cutting out the parts you don't like. You're looking for what's the sacred heart of the matter here, being fully woke to, as best you can, to what toxic trajectories may be in existing translations.
Yeah, and still a work in progress, like with the fact that not settled about the word sacred. Like, I wonder if there's another wording that could get at all the things we were just talking about, that might even be more helpful to make that, to draw that out.
So the next one that we wanted to explore these two words in verse 6, renown and glory. Where is that?
Renown instead of glory.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Lord help me. And the renown of his generosity. So instead of the glory of his grace, those are big words that we can't fit into today's episode, but we're going to get to further. If you're curious about that, or just scroll back to the last verse or the last page there, like the life breath for the Holy Spirit. Don't worry, we'll get there. We're going to get there. But the next one we want to explore is, let's see. Go ahead.
I was thinking that we were going to do the glory in this one, and then maybe spend more time with grace in future ones.
Great. Let's do that.
Because They're most of them are in this chapter for glory.
Okay, yeah. Let us talk about glory, or rather renown. So could you lend your voice to whatever stretch of the of
Mm-hmm.
6 you think is appropriate?
Yeah. So we're continuing on with the same kind of sentence that we've been working on for a while, just taking it in chunks. So yeah, what seemed good for his intention toward affirming the renown of his generosity, through which he generously gave you the one he loved. And yeah, we'll talk more about the generous pieces of that, because that carries a lot of weight too. But the renown here,
Mm-hmm.
that's another like glory. Man, there's so much there that has nothing to do with scripture or Jesus, or that could be brought into things. I think of even like finding glory in battle, like in killing other
Yeah.
people, like how that's not connected.
Yeah. It doesn't mean like badassness.
No. um I think at the core of what doxa, the Greek word there, means is something along the idea of noteworthiness, something that's attention grabbing, something that's worth noticing, that's um, worth sharing with others, because like, whoa, this thing is incredible, right? um, and then you get it connected with Israel and the history there, and God's presence in the tabernacle and the temple that's represented with the light, and like making Moses' face glow, and all
Mm-hmm.
this other stuff. And there's connections there that you can't ignore. And it's also not going to be possible to put like a whole paragraph in here for that one word.
Yeah.
um, so I played with a lot of different things, and back in Matthew, I was using phrases like brilliant presence, and for all to see, and things like that, trying to kind of lean on what is this getting at, kind of at surfacing the most relevant part of it there. And what I found as I was doing Ephesians and some of the other Paul books is that renown works pretty well. It's about the fame, the reputation, the high impression that people have of God, or in this case, God's generosity,
Mm-hmm.
that's worth paying attention to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This one is really just as simple as making sure we're going to not use words that, while earlier we were both like, we were fist bumping about some good, like the flexibility of metaphors.
Mm-hmm.
Glory, there is a like radiance, brilliance kind of
Mm-hmm.
momentum within the early linguistic tradition about glory.
Mm-hmm.
It's so friggin' lost. It's
Yeah.
in it
It's not in a Merriam-Webster entry about glory anymore, right?
no, no, and it often is code language for God's supremacy and God's
Mhm.
need to be um ass kissed.
Like a diva, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's more like a kind of a
And not
diva feeling of like, look at me, aren't I great? Yeah.
and not in the good
Yeah.
like drag queen sense of that kind of like fun energy. Like God has that
No.
kind of good drag queen mojo, but not that's not what this means. It's so much more like everybody talk about how awesome I am. I mean, I could be doing a voice of a certain lunatic in Florida right now to enunciate this.
Mhm.
But that like the appeasing of God's deep and abiding insecurity and need to know that he is the dopest shit
Right.
ever. It's like that the chief end of man is to enjoy God and glorify, it's the
The messaging is really, it's like the chief end
oh,
of what it means to be human is to play to God's ego.
Exactly. Whereas
Yeah.
it was Irenaeus who said, the glory of God is a human fully alive. Like the glory of God is
Hmm.
the outpouring into creation, the divinization of the cosmos in the pattern of the cross. Because in the fourth gospel, the climax of the revelation of God's glory, God's renown, of God's divinization of reality is
Hmm.
Christ lifted up on the cross.
Yeah.
It's a deep mystery, and so the tradition going in this direction of God's ego stroking is the opposite. It's
Right.
crossless. It's God's need to build crosses for other people instead of God's taking them down and getting on it himself.
Yeah, absolutely. Like exactly what you're saying. Jesus being willing to be crucified for all to see, that is like the pinnacle of what it means to live into that glory, that like pay attention to this, like my self-emptying, my sacrifice for your benefit,
Mm,
not
mm-hmm.
needing you to like flatter me.
Yeah.
It's it ends up being the opposite of how it gets used most of the time, and gets used by teachers and pastors and theologians to basically say, hey, you should feel like a piece of crap
Yeah.
so that you can spend more time flattering God's ego.
Lee. Yeah. No, no wonder like so many trajectories of Christian spiritual formation just lead to like deep mental unhealth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's
It's,
abusive.
yeah, it's like systematic gaslighting. And it's,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And if you don't go along with the gaslighting, you're going to get burned.
Mm-hmm.
So your translation here of affirming the renown of his generosity, like, hey, he's got this, the divine has this incredible reputation
Mm-hmm.
of lavish generosity. Everything is grace, everything is gift. So affirming the glory of his grace is just kind of religious flowers,
Yeah.
and I love flowers, but like that's not what
Yeah.
we need
Just kind of
here.
gloss over it as like, oh yeah, like shiny things. Like, okay, moving on.
Yeah, my eyes glaze right past it. But knowing like what's the renown of the divine? What's the renown of Yahweh?
Is
Generosity,
generosity. Yeah.
gifting. It's all gift, as old friend Paul Sparks talks about.
Mm-hmm.
The yeah, that feels really good here. It's it and again, I love that it's not just saying let's get rid of the like abusive stuff. When you dig
Mm-hmm.
underneath the abusive crap, um, there's really rich ways to
Yeah.
revere the sacred.
Yeah. It's not just throwing it out, it's actually like wiping off the crud to see what was underneath the whole time. Like, oh, this is actually maybe good stuff.
Yeah, like there's a weird what's the word for it? Iconoclasm, I suppose. Like
Mm-hmm.
we need to tip over some holy cows here in the language that we use. We need to dare I say it, reject the glory of God to embrace the renown of God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or incredible reputation, as you put
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Next one. Uh, in verse 7, we're going to usually the word redemption is in there, and you've got the purchase of liberation from enslavement.
Mm-hmm.
Rolls off the
That
tongue,
one. Yeah,
but
it
it's Paul
really,
here. You can make it.
yeah, there was no way to have that be like a word or two. Um, I thought about it for a while, and it needs the full explanation because it carries the full meaning. We just don't have a context for what that word meant.
No.
Um, and redemption in a very literal, like, yeah, technically this is what that one of the meanings of the word redemption, but like we don't have a context where there are people who are enslaved, at least publicly and acknowledge, used to,
Mm-hmm.
but not at the moment. And so we just don't have any context for what redemption can mean. The word here is really more like just purchase from enslavement, in the sense of like the slave is up for auction and I was the highest bidder,
Mm-hmm.
which feels gross. But then I wrestled with this in Matthew where this word came up, and it becomes very clear that there's this metaphor of being rescued from the enslavement that you're paying off debts through slave labor. And Jesus is purchasing your debt, basically. And so now you owe Jesus the slave labor to pay off the debt to him instead. And his response after purchasing is to forgive the debt. Like, you don't owe me anything.
Yeah.
And so it ends up being purchasing the liberation from the enslavement instead of just transferring the enslavement. So that's what it means to be a slave of Christ, is to be free, because that's the very next act is releasing it.
Mm-hmm. The release of shortfalls.
Yeah, so that is all contained in this single Greek word. Is this whole context is understood by the people originally reading and writing this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's what it means, and it just gets lost in a word like redemption. Like, technically correct, but what is this even talking about?
Yeah. It's a lovely religious word, but it's worth setting it out a little bit more, unfolding it. And then, yeah, you've got the release of shortfalls instead of
Right.
forgiveness of trespasses.
Right. And that one's another, like, trying to figure out how to make it fit. It's the Greek word literally means like fall to the side. So it's metaphorical. There's lots of path metaphors throughout the scripture. Like, walking a path is living in sync with what it means to be a human, treating each other well and connecting with God. And it's not a destination, it's a journey. Like all the cliches I can throw out there, but it's true. Like that's the image, is,
Yeah.
And so shortfall like has the concept of like tripping or falling, and it also it's consistently, not every time maybe, but consistently paired with this like economic debt language, which redemption is, because that's typically why people were enslaved at Jesus' time, is because they were underwater in debt and were trying to pay it off through working it off. Trying makes it seem voluntary, but involuntarily having to work it off. And so that's what this is.
That's great. Yeah, it's less about needing to get rid of anything particularly toxic in the text and more trying to find the deeper, healthier metaphors. I mean, one of the big lessons for me when we went through Matthew last season was just how full that metaphor of the path, the way of walking is, where even some of the images of conventionally called sin are really just forms of like straying from a path or stumbling. Like, it's all, I mean, those words, you didn't even make those translations. It's just like, it's all right there. But when you are willing to like click into place a couple of the parts where they've avoided that for whatever reason, it just breathes better.
Yeah. Because like we talked about before, it's not about getting rid of metaphors for the sake of clarity, or even trying to like create metaphors for whatever, recognizing as I'm going through it, like, oh, this metaphor shows up, and not just this word, but all these other like connected images that are all part of like a whole theme of images. And wanting to really commit to making sure that that is visible in the English as it is already in the Greek. But because everybody is having to make decisions based on like what seems best to them as they're translating, not everybody's making decisions that allow those images to come through and allow the themes to really show up that way. So.
Right. Well, there have been quite a few other translation decisions that you made here in the first 14. We only went through verse 7, but
right. Yeah.
In the interest of time, we are going to conclude that here and continue on next week with at verse 15 onward. So thank you as always for joining us, well, on the path on this leg of the journey. The easiest way to support Founded Translation is to leave us a rating or review in your podcast player of choice if you're listening to this, or give us a big like and a share, and maybe a subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook. All of these things make it easier for more people to find the show. Got to appease those algorithms. The second best way to support the show is to become a sponsor. You can do that for just $5 a month. When you do that, you'll get comment access on this translation's Google Doc and the satisfaction that you're supporting exceptionally nerdy independent media. You can find the link to the community in the show notes of this podcast episode or in the video notes wherever you're watching. The music you're listening to is by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. Found in Translation was produced by Perry FM on Chinook Land. Goodbye, Brandon.
Bye, Brandon.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for watching and listening.